Alright, how's it going? How's everybody doing? Etc, etc. This will be my first video. I'll be talking about the Quinque Viae, Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs for the existence of God. I'll be doing this, one, to just simply practice the philosophy that I've had last semester, to keep my mind sharp, basically, and two, basically to have, in essence, a pre-constructed, standalone worthy argumentation for these, for future videos, or for future concepts whenever it should arise in one of my classes. As it stands now, my belief system is a little different than a lot of people, but that's okay. I'm simply doing this under the logical argumentation abilities that I'll need to develop, refine, and eventually master if I hope to be eligible to get the doctorate in the philosophy of science coursework. That is my major, because I, being an idiot, took what boils down to a quad major. Yeah. Anyway, this is why I drank. So, let's get started. Thomas Aquinas was, if I remember correctly, a Roman Catholic monk. I think he was a Dominican monk. And he wrote Summa Theologica, which was a very, very well-received book among the church, and is still used in reference today. The majority of these arguments are something that many of you, if you take a religious philosophy, medieval philosophy, or courseworks, or are simply a person who likes to look into the backstory behind the whole theism versus atheism, religion versus science, blah 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 blah, arguments that basically rage over YouTube, the internets, and holes in the wall bars. It's the kind of stuff that you'd probably be interested in. So it boils down to the 5 ways. These proofs take the form of philosophical arguments in that they posit these premises and then the conclusion. The 5 arguments are the argument from the unmoved mover, the argument from contingency, the argument from causation, the argument from degree, and the teleological argument. Okay. The short summary is the argument of the unmoved mover, which I will go to in depth, boils down to the universe is it's a system that's constantly in motion. Every single event, however major or minor, is directly put into motion by something previous, i.e. the domino effect. If you were to push one domino, that domino knocks down the next, and the next, and the next, and so forth ad nauseum until you hit the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, the whole concept behind this is a fairly logical concept, because nothing moves on its own. Everything has to be acted on by an outside agent. This, of course, follows with Newtonian physics, which dictates that, one, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, but more importantly for this argument, that objects at rest tend to stay at rest, and objects in motion tend to stay in motion until acted upon by an outside force. The argument of the unmoved mover is a logically based argument. Unfortunately, it does break down towards the end. The argument of causation is effectively the same argument, only instead of using the vernacular for motion, it uses cause and effect. Every single event is the effect of a preceding cause, which in turn is the effect of a preceding cause, and so on and so forth. Both of these are reliant on the concept that there cannot be a causal loop, which is, for those of you who don't know, A causes B, B causes C, C causes D, and D causes A, so that it becomes an infinitely recurring loop of instances that occur due entirely to the fact that they occur. And this is logically, in the medium scale, the scale that you and I and all of us are used to dealing with, this is true. You can't burn a candle to heat water, which heats wax, which heats the wax and reforms the original candle which then is lit, which then self-lights, and so on and so forth. It just doesn't work. It breaks down. The problem with these two arguments is there's two basic problems. The first is the most basic, the most simplistic, and in my opinion, the most effective. If the case is made that, such as these say, that everything that is moved by a mover, and an infinite regress is impossible, or everything is cause and effect, and every cause is the effect of something preceding it, you have to come to a point where there is the initial unmoved mover or the initial causeless effect. And for Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways, the Quinque Viae, or Quinque Viae, I'm not sure, my Latin is horrible because I know none. It boils down to everything in this system is cause and effect. Everything is the effect of a preceding cause, except for the first. Now, the problem with that is that in any system where you say everything, anytime you say everything, the moment there is an aberration or an exception to the rule, the entire system is broken and it is useless. It's the same thing that saying every single bullet ever fired out of a gun has killed somebody, and then you discharge a round into a wall or a ballistics gel substrate and the bullet doesn't kill anybody. You have completely nullified the argument. Alright, so even at a basic logical level, a basic philosophical level, and granted I'm not some, 3rd or 5th or 7th year philosophy student with an amazing grasp of this stuff. I'm in my 2nd semester. I'm getting by, and I'm only doing as best I can do based off of the things that I've learned from those around me, my professors, and the material itself. But in my opinion, that seems like a pretty glaring oversight to state an absolute system that has an exception to it built in. And that's just, it doesn't work for me. And there's really no way around that one. However, even if you could get past that one, then you have the concept that if since an infinite regress is impossible, a causal loop is impossible, that there was an unmoved mover that in and of itself is not moved by anything else, and reserve that place for God. That seems like a pretty big leap when it comes to just the concepts at hand. Simply because something violates the system doesn't mean it's God. And if it did, then the system itself would have to completely change, because then it wouldn't be an infinite regress, and it wouldn't be everything is a cause and effect situation. Everything would be a direct or an indirect effect of one cause. But that isn't how these are posited, that's not how these are put forth, and if that was, even if it was, which it isn't, then you'd have this major problem of proving how everything directly links back to the original point, which is God. And without verification or the ability to falsify any hypotheses, that itself that's self-debunking. So we can move on from those. The next one is the argument from contingency. Alright, and that simply states that many things in the universe may either exist or not exist. It is impossible for everything in the universe to be contingent, which is to either exist or not exist, and there would be a time when nothing existed, and so nothing would exist now, since there would be nothing to bring anything into existence, which is clearly false. Therefore, there must be a necessary being whose existence is not contingent on any other being or beings. This being is whom we call God. Now, the problem with this one, in my opinion, and granted it's a pretty decent one, but my problem is this. It starts off by saying that many things in the universe may either exist or not exist. And it is impossible for everything in the universe to either exist or not exist, to be contingent upon the existence of something else. And there would be a time when nothing existed. Well, the thing is nothing is a very weighted word. The void of space is often called nothingness. All the space between all the other stuff. But in reality, it's full of a whole lot of crap. Radiation, dark energy, wherever the hell that is, Dark matter, we pretty much know it's there. We have no way to find it, though. You know, light and everything else. And even just if looking at it from a 3.5 or 4D scale, that simply by having space there is an existence. So nothingness is a very weighted term. Now, to say that at some point there was absolutely nothing, no universe, no nothing, except for God, who created everything, that once again breaks itself, in all honesty. If it is a non-contingent being, and it creates everything, there must be, one, a point of creation, and two, there would have to be something for it to create with. Nothing can be created ex nihilo, out of nothingness. This is, the basic law of conservation of mass and energy. And for those of you who think that, well, the Big Bang states that everything was made from nothingness, blah, 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 that's not what it says. There's a whole list of all sorts of weird-ass theories, and some of them are weirder than others, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're less plausible, which is the fun part. But looking at it from a religious standpoint, if that was true, and God exists outside of everything else, what would be the point of interacting with anything else? What would be the point of creating anything? And that falls into one of the theodicies of it is better to create than to not create, and blah, 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 which assigns arbitrary values to things. But that's another discussion. The next one is the argument of gradation, or argument of degree. In short, it's varying perfections of varying degrees may be found throughout the universe. These degrees assume the existence of an ultimate standard of that degree. Therefore, perfection must have a pinnacle, and this pinnacle is whom we call God. Blah, blah, blah. Alright, first off, varying perfections of varying degrees, and that these degrees assume the existence of an ultimate standard. It's like saying heat. There's an ultimate version of heat, which is, some would posit fire, you could posit plasma, you could posit an absolute singularity at the core of a black hole, or whatever else. But there's a point where it's absolute maximum energy, so it's maximum heat. And that's fair. It's fair to put that forth. And then it states that there is degrees of perfection. Now, perfection is a very complicated word, to say the least. When something is perfect, it depends entirely on the criteria evaluating it. For example, a shield that could not be penetrated by anything, radiation, heat, sound, kinetic, anything. A shield that is literally impenetrable by anything conceivable or inconceivable by mankind is the perfect shield. But it is a really shitty sandwich. So perfection is a very arbitrary thing because you have to look at it from a point of view. The absolute pinnacle or perfection of, let's say, goodness, for example, is a very hard thing to nail down because goodness is interpreted in 1,000,001 different ways. Every single person probably has a slightly different perspective on what is good and what is not good. Not just from a hedonistic scale, from what is pleasurable, but things that are almost obligatorily good. Helping another person, altruism, for example, is good. However, it's also a bad example because if you're a truly good person and help other people for no reason other than to help other people, and you get taken advantage of repeatedly, you're not actually helping people that deserve to be helped or people that need to be helped. You are simply facilitating them leeching off of you, or whatever. So for every argument for ultimate goodness or the pinnacle of perfection, it's damn near arbitrary. It's just a matter of interpretation and what point of view you're taking. So to assume that there's this absolute pinnacle of perfection, to call that God seems pretty flawed, because if there's varying degrees of perfection, it's perfection in what? And from that, perfection is not a degree; it is an absolution, or not an absolute. It's an absolute. To be perfect means to be the absolute definitive example or exemplary case of something. The perfect weapon is one that kills 100% of the time, never fails, never misses, and has no problems with it. But a perfect weapon is not, once again, a perfect sandwich. So it's just, it becomes this really confusing and circular diatribe, no matter how you look at it. And as such, most people generally don't bring it up. Now, the last one, which is really interesting, is the teleological argument, which is based on, I want to say Aristotelian physics or science, but I could be wrong. It's the teleos of something. That, in short, all natural bodies in the world act towards ends. These objects are in and of themselves unintelligent. Acting towards an end is a characteristic of intelligence, therefore there exists an intelligence that guides everything else towards their ends, and this is the being whom we call God. Alright, it's basically the God's divine will thing. But it states that, for example, the teleos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. That is an example that was used by the first proponent, I believe it was Aristotle, but I could be wrong. And he said that the teleos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. The teleos of a child is to become a man. The teleos of X is to become Y, whatever. The problem with that is that that's not necessarily true. Things do not become... An acorn does not become an oak tree because it's meant to, or because it needs to, or because it's told to. It becomes an oak tree because it is a very basic form of an oak tree. It doesn't become something else. It simply grows and develops and changes as it does so. The goal of... There is no teleos to anything. And even if there was a teleos to anything, it would not be humanity. Because humanity has the uncanny ability to do whatever the hell it pleases. So, by dictating that God exists because we all have a purpose, because everything has a purpose, is the same thing as saying God doesn't exist because all of us, humanity and everything we have ever done exists only so that we can create plastic because the planet wants plastic. It's an equivalent argument. And it's a ridiculous one, but that's only because it's not the one that we're all used to hearing over and over. Now, these are just the 5 ways for the 5 proofs for the existence of God. And the reason I wanted to hit these first is because this is pretty much where it starts. And I kind of lightly went over most of these, and if somebody wishes to put forth a video or write me a note or whatever dictating, or I'm flawed, or something like that, I'd appreciate that. The only thing is that I would not... I won't respond, and if I do, it won't be kind to people who use well, it's God's will, and His will is not our will, and His ways are not our ways, blah, blah, blah. The God works mysterious ways thing. Because, I'll go into that later, but that's just a cop-out. And for any of these to be true, half of them are self-nullifying. And it amazes me that even to this day, people still use these. Not nearly as much as they used to, but people still use them. After this, I'm probably going to get started on my first actual goal. This is basically just an introduction and getting used to doing this. But my first actual goal of doing the problem of evil. And for those of you who don't know, the problem of evil states that if God is all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful, as the Abrahamic religions say that He is, which is Christianity in all of its many forms, Judaism and Islam, then why does evil exist? Because it should not. But I'll get to that next time. Thank you and have a good day, apparently.